Hi, Mike Keller here. Just thought I'd give you a quick kind of basic design 2017 video. We've had a lot of things change in the software in the past year or so. A lot of really neat, exciting improvements that we've seen. So some of the things I do today are quite a bit different than what I would have done maybe a year or so ago. So I thought I'd kind of share some of that with you. Some of the different software tools that I'm using, how I'm using them right now. Also give you a little bit of an overview of all the materials because we've had some changes there as well. Not a real deep scientific delve into it, but just some basic ideas about what's out there and what I'm using. Although I have to tell you right off the bat, I'm still primarily using Emacs, but we've got a lot of interesting stuff that's out there and might be something you'd want to use in certain situations. So I thought I'd give you a little bit of an update on your kind of for people that are new to the system, good place to start. For people that have been using the system for a while, maybe something to take a look at. May find a thing or two here that you can find to be helpful in making your designs a little bit more easy and more efficient. Hope you find this useful. So one of the first things we've really seen change in over the past 6 months or so is what types of materials are available. And it can get a little confusing because now the list is a lot longer than it used to be. You can kind of simply break this down into a couple categories. We have ceramic materials, we have materials that are basically resin-based, and then we also have some zirconia that's available to us as well. So for the ceramics, I mean, we're all familiar, of course, with the Emacs CAD that's available. Empress CAD we're very familiar with, but we also have added some of the Vita materials. And the Vita materials that are ceramic-based are the Suprenity, the Mark II, which you can kind of think in similar strength characteristics to Empress, and the Trilux Forte, which is kind of like an Empress multi-block. It has a gradation and color to it. So those are your ceramics. Again, the Mark II and the Trilux are going to be not as quite as strong as an Emacs in that Empress strength range. Suprenity I've not worked with, but is supposed to actually be a little stronger than Emacs. Again, have not worked with it, so I can't really attest to how strong it is. The next category of material that we have are resins. And probably the first one we had was Telio CAD. This is a temporary material, so this is just used to make temporary crowns or bridges. Then we had Lava Ultimate, which is, we all know kind of the history on that. This was originally brought out and was by the manufacturer specified to be used in full crowns or inlays and onlays. 3M has since pulled their approval for using it in full crown, so it is now strictly partial coverage. So inlays and onlays, you can still use the Lava Ultimate for. GC Ceramart is in that same class of materials. Some differences between some of these materials. I'm not going to go into all the details, but in the way you bond these materials, and make sure you read the manufacturer's directions if you're going to use any of these ceramic, the resin-based materials for restorations. Ceramart is still is listed as using it for full crowns if you want. Vita and Namek, same thing. It's another resin-based material that is by the manufacturer certified to use for full crowns. I will have to say though, with these three materials, I am limiting my use on these to strictly partial coverage, and I'm not doing a whole ton of them. I have done some Ceramart and some Namek, mostly just to see how they go. The one thing you'll notice with these materials, the aesthetics are nowhere near as good as the ceramics. They can only be polished. They're certainly not going to be glazed in the oven. So be careful with these. I mean, they may have a place, but I certainly would not go big into these, certainly not for full coverage. But if you wanted to try them in some partial coverage situations, you may find them to be helpful there. We do also have the ability to mill zirconia with our system. Not many people know that. The issue, of course, with that is you need to have a separate oven to sinter the zirconia, which the oven that most of us have will not do that. Our ovens are just for stain and glaze. It's not a sintering oven, and because of the time it would take to sinter the zirconia, this would not be a one-visit procedure. So my take on zirconia is, for the few times that I'm going to use it, I would rather just go ahead and do the scans, design the case, and send it off to my laboratory and let them mill the zirconia for me, rather than investing in a zirconia oven and having to learn how to manipulate the material. It's not a very simple material to work with, from what I understand, so that's something I'm not going to get too into. Another kind of odd material that's in here that some people may not know about, we have this bob. This Bob Central burnout block. If you ever want to do a gold crown, for a patient you want to use your digital system, you can do that. You can go ahead and take the scans, design it as usual, and then select Bob acrylic block here and mill out essentially what is a burnout for the lab. They can then just sprue that and cast it, which I've done before. Works very nicely. It's kind of neat too, because these mill pretty quickly. I've done this where I've milled the burnout block while I was making the temporary for the patient, and then actually gone and been able to try that burnout block in. They're clear, so you can actually see through them, which is kind of neat. You can actually see how well they're fitting. So they're a neat little option for a gold crown if you want to do that. So that's kind of the materials list. One other thing too is we've got different translucencies on our Emacs right now, and I still primarily am using Emacs. Tried and true. You've got over 10 years worth of good clinical data on it. But now we do have this new material, this MT, medium translucency. So up until then, I was reserving my use of high trans for partial coverage, because I found for me in full crowns it got kind of gray. It just didn't work all that well. So I used a lot of LT. What I'm finding now is this MT has come along. The MT is a nice kind of happy medium between these two, and it does a very nice job, and I'm primarily using MT. The only kind of hiccup with MT is that we are limited in our shade range right now. So you really just have some A's, a B shade, and some bleach shades. So if you have a restoration, these are though some of the most common shade. Well, at least the A's and that B1 are very, very common shades. So this does cover me in a lot of instances. So I do a lot of MT right now. So that's one of the things that really has changed for me in the past year or so. So that's what we do. Moving on here, the one thing we're going to see a dramatic change in version 5.85 is this color. This is just astoundingly different. I really had not been using the color, to be honest. I didn't find it was all that helpful in marking margins. That's changed. The engineers down at E4D have done a fantastic job with this, and we now have color that is amazing. And as you can see, this is very helpful at marking margins. So that has been a big change. So that's the big kind of thing you'll see in 5.85. One of the other little kind of things that may be under the radar is this byte adjustment feature. I'm actually going to reset this byte to show you how that works. So I'm just going to reset this the way we normally would set a byte, but then I'll show you something kind of cool here. That's going to go in. So we get, and this, to me, that byte does look a little bit heavy. By simply hitting the A key on the keyboard, the byte will actually automatically kind of fine-tune and align. And I've been pretty impressed with how this has worked. This kind of gives us a little bit finer tuning on the byte. It takes just a few seconds, and boom, it's done. It's pretty amazing. That's one thing you have to be careful of with this is since version 5.8. Be careful you don't rotate the model when you're on top of it. If you're going to move the model, you want to make sure you're off of it, because that does happen. You can end up rotating that model around and creating a mess. So that's one thing to be careful. So if you're going to move that model, make sure you come off of the side of it, because you can actually get in here and you can move that model if you're holding down the right click button and going. So anyway, so that's the automatic alignment adjustment. Pretty cool little feature. Again, for marking margins, things have changed a little bit here in terms of now I will use the color when we start to get into interproximal areas. You can see that's a help as you're getting down subgingival. This case doesn't happen to be subgingival, but if you had a subgingival case, this is something that can be very, very, very helpful in terms of marking the margin. Now, one thing that I always really preach to people when to help make design go faster was I would spend a fair bit of time with orientation at this stage of the game. I don't do that anymore. My orientation, I'm real quick with this now. I'm going to make sure I'm roughly centered. I'm over the top, and I'm going to make sure I'm pretty close on the buckle. That's it. I'm not doing anything more with that, because we have the plan tab now. And what we were kind of doing when we were really fine-tuning, making sure the orientation was just right, was to make sure that proposal would end up oriented over the tooth nicely. So that I'm not spending a lot of time fussing with anymore, because I know I have the plan tab available to me. And then we go to plan tab. So how I'm using Plan Tab, for me what I'm finding is the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to resize the tooth to get it to kind of fill the space closely, get it so that we don't have a lot of gapping here. Also, what I'm looking at too, when we talk about autogenesis, is when it has a lot of trouble, sometimes it's because there's a mismatch between the size of the proposal and the size of the preparation. Now, sometimes you can't do it. This little jog here, you couldn't fix that if you wanted to. But if the size of the initial proposal is similar to the size of the tooth, you're going to get a lot less twisting and stretching and all that sort of stuff going on. So that's the first thing I'm doing. I'm going to get it resized roughly. Then I'm going to move it into position, get it kind of centered in here. And then what I'm looking to do is just kind of line these marginal ridges up. So sometimes I'm going to use rotate here. And again, this is where we don't have to be so worried about that orientation being right. If we have a little bit of a off orientation on our scans, we can. It's much easier to fix it here than it is to do an orientation by being able to do these rotations and moves and resizes on the green ghost tooth here. So that I think is a big help, and it's really changed how I design things. You see those marginal ridges a little bit high still, so I'm going to kind of scooch this down a little bit. We can bring our bite in at this point. And if I'm still a little high, I'm trying to give autogenesis just like I was when I was doing this before with the orientation. I want to give autogenesis a head start. So I'm pretty good there. I'm not worried. Yeah, the bite's a little bit high, but you're not going to get it perfect here. You want to get it in the ballpark. And then we can come over to design. And once you get to this design part, this should fly by pretty good. You really generally are not going to have as much change as you would have in the past with design if you've gotten that plan. And you can see that's, you're pretty close to there. You don't have to do very much. Now I will come off of the color, and I prefer to design in the stone. I find it just a little easier. So again, to be efficient, first of all, if we can minimize the tool sets we have to work with. Now we don't have to kind of come into these incremental change tools now, because we really don't have anything here any big moves that have to be made. We've just got little moves we have to make. So that saves us messing around in here. One thing I will kind of go through here as well. I will always bring, if I've got a nice smooth preparation and a good margin, I'm going to bring this into about 0.6 on the axle. These are your spacer settings. I like to have things fitting a little bit better, and I know if with my preps, the way I prep, usually a 0.6 works really well. You can bring the occlusal in a little bit. That doesn't really impact on retention at all. The axial does though. And then I also will change my margin ramp to 0.5. And the margin ramp for people this is kind of one of those hard concepts to get your head around sometimes. What that means is how much porcelain's in contact with the margin of the tooth. So we're looking at this, and that means 0.5 millimeter of porcelain should be resting on the edge of this margin, which is good. If you've got a decent 1 millimeter or so shoulder or chamfer preparation, a 0.5 is good. You can go a little bit lighter. If you're doing something like an on-lay or veneer, you're going to bring that all the way up to 0 because you're coming out to a finer edge. So I will always make that change. In fact, I'll show you at the end how to change the defaults on this so you can make a default that works for you. So I can skip incremental changes entirely and go right to freeform. And here's where, if you want to be nice and efficient, you try to do the same thing every time the same way. So I always will start with rubber tooth, and I know there's always these little kind of divots around the circumference of the tooth, so I'm going to come in and I'm going to get those fixed first. I know that I want this to be a little more rounded profile, and then I know also that a lot of times these contacts are not as broad as I'd like them to be. So instead of pulling from the top, I've always kind of come down from below the contact and pulled that way. That way you get a contact not at the marginal ridge, but a little closer to where the anatomical contact will be. And you can see how that's brought that together nicely, and I'll just do the same on the distal here as well. Just kind of draw that out. And maybe I will just nudge that a little bit. But now I'm pretty good with that. And now I'm going to bring in my bite and look at the thickness. And again, I'm still on rubber tooth. I'm trying to use as few tools as possible because that makes me the most efficient. So all I'm doing here, rubber tooth, and just rotating this model around to these high spots. There are a lot of ways to adjust bite. For me, I found this is the most efficient way. I'm not changing tools. It's just a matter of rotating out the models so that I can get access to where the bite is a little heavy and move it in. And I can sometimes will change the influence of rubber tooth a little bit, just change out how big a spot it is if I'm trying to hit a fine spot. But that's pretty darn good. I'm just probably this marginal ridge a little bit more, and that's probably all I want to do. So then I'm done. That's it. And then I'm just going to go to check my proximal contacts. Smoother tool. Again, this is only the second tool I've used in this entire design. Smoother tool, get that down so I have a little aqua in there. Get back to the distal, see what nice broad contacts here. And I'm going to go to nice aqua in there. And that's pretty much about it. I can check my material thickness. I've got plenty of thickness here. I could, if I wanted to, maybe thicken things up. When we're worried about breakage, and that's the other thing, is that Ivoclar has kind of changed the recommendations on thickness, and they're okay with 1 millimeter of thickness now. So this is plenty. I've got tons of room here. If I had a little bit of yellow in these grooves in the past, I would have gone and I would have gotten those filled in and gotten that back to at least green. I'm not worried about it. If I've got little yellow lines coming through here now, I'm just going to let that go. That's going to be perfectly fine. I know that's plenty of strength for what we need to do. If we've got green on the inclines and a little bit of yellow here, not a problem. I will, the band of structure all the way around, I do want to make sure this is in green for sure, because this is not going to affect anything particularly, but I do want to make sure this is good and strong, because this is, what I found is this is the area that needs to have some thickness to it to give you a good restoration. And then we're going to shoot over to the mill. And, you know, most of the time I'm not even checking a mill sim. If I know my preparation is nice, we can check it. And the easy way to check for interferences is, once the mill sim is completed here, is just to flip this model up on its top and look from the inside at the restoration and look for any hang-ups. So that's all I'll do there. And I'm looking to see if I have any blue bleeding through anywhere here, and I don't know, and I've moved that into the 0.6, so that's taking care of it. And you know, you get your typical rough mill sim there, but that's really all we have to worry about there. So that's just kind of how I'm designing in 2017 versus maybe how I was designing a couple years ago. Always with an eye towards, you know, getting a nice quality restoration, but also trying to be a little bit more efficient in how I'm designing things, and so I can get there a little bit quicker. You know, we're trying to do these cases in a single visit. We're trying to get these done as efficiently as possible. So again, you know, picking your materials well, a good preparation still is absolutely critical. I mean, if you have a good preparation with lots of clearance, these things go so much smoother. That hasn't changed at all. But some of the little nuances of the software have made this a lot easier for us to get from the beginning to the end. And that plan tab has been, for me, the biggest change really in the past couple of years. That really helps to make this part of things, the design, go so much smoother. Yeah, in terms of the showing you how to change those defaults, those for the spacer settings, those are back in the settings here, and I just have to let this case save. Okay, so we just double click on the settings tab here in the main screen, doesn't matter who you're in for a patient, and it will bring this up for us. And this is where you've got to come in to set the settings here. So here we go. So here's our settings. So I'm going to by default move my spacer thickness into 0.06. I will tend to leave this at 0.1. I don't really have a concern with that. And we can also do the same for margin ramp through the same setting. It's just saving that setting right now. We'll come back and do the same for a margin ramp. And so again, we'll just make this a 0.5 margin ramp and save it. And that will help to make those crowns fit a little bit more tightly for you. Anyway, so I hope you find this helpful. You know, it's really exciting. I've been really impressed with the changes that we've been getting in the software over the past year or so. I think we'll get some really interesting things that'll be coming along in 2017. But it's just a nice little kind of refresher for some, and just to give you a little idea of how I'm doing things a little bit differently now than I was just a couple years ago. Thanks for watching. Bye.